Alara Voss had always believed the desert outside Tonopah, Nevada, belonged only to wind, dust devils, and the ghosts of old silver miners. On the night of August 17th, everything changed. She was 26, a night shift telescope operator at the tiny observatory that barely clung to funding, and she had driven 3 miles off the cracked county road to escape the smell of burnt coffee and the snoring of her co-worker Dale. The Perseid meteor shower was peaking, and the sky felt close enough to touch. She lay on the warm hood of her rust-flaked Jeep, boots off, counting shooting stars the way other people counted sheep. That was when the one that didn't burn up came down. It entered the atmosphere like a blue-white needle, silent until the last second, then roared like a mountain tearing itself in half. The impact flung Alara off the hood. Sand hissed against her cheeks as the shockwave passed. When she sat up coughing, a newborn crater glowed 200 yards away, edges still dripping molten glass. She should have driven back to the observatory. Instead she walked toward it, drawn by something that felt less like curiosity and more like gravity. In the center of the crater lay a man. He was naked, skin luminous under starlight, the color of moonlit pearl. Long black hair fanned across the sand like spilled ink. Blood, silver, not red, traced thin lines from a gash across his ribs. When Alara's flashlight beam touched his face, his eyes snapped open, vertical pupils in liquid gold. He tried to stand and collapsed. "Don't," she said, voice shaking. "You're hurt." He stared at her as if her language were a song he'd once known and almost forgotten. Then, in a voice that seemed to come from inside her own skull, he answered, "I have no word for what I am in your tongue, but you may call me Kale." That was how it began. She hid him in the observatory's equipment shed, a cinderblock box no one entered after midnight. She cleaned the wound with bottled water and gauze. The cut sealed itself in minutes, leaving only a faint scar like frost on glass. When she asked where he was from, he pointed straight up, past the roof, past the stars, to a place he called the seventh fold of the veil. His ship, he said, had been a living thing grown from crystal and thought. It died protecting him when the hunters found his trail. The hunters were his own people, what humans would call enforcers of the Covenant. The Covenant forbade any of the Veilborn from lingering on seeded worlds. Earth was seeded. Kale had broken the law by falling in love with it centuries ago, returning again and again in secret, watching humanity the way a child watches fish in an aquarium. This time they had caught him. "They will come in threes," he told her, sitting on an overturned crate while she wrapped him in Dale's forgotten Carhartt jacket. "Always threes. And they will not leave without me, dead or alive." Alara's pulse hammered in her throat, but she heard herself say, "Then we make sure they don't find you alive." She didn't know why she said it. Maybe because no one had ever looked at her the way Kale did. Like she was the first sunrise he'd ever seen. The first week was a fever dream. Kale could not eat earth food. It tasted of ash to him. He drank only starlight and the faint electromagnetic hum of power lines. Alara drove him at night to the lonely transmission towers outside town, where he stood barefoot on the sand, arms spread, skin glowing faintly as he fed. She kept watch with a shotgun across her lap that she didn't know how to use. He learned English in 3 days by touching her temple while she slept. She woke up speaking fragments of his language, syllables that tasted like frost and bells. They talked for hours in the dark. He told her how his people had watched humanity rise from the savannah, how they had argued for millennia whether to reveal themselves or let the young race stumble alone. He had voted to reveal. That was his first crime. His second was refusing to leave when the majority decided Earth must remain ignorant. "I wanted to see what you would become," he said, tracing the constellation Orion on the dusty floor with one finger. "I still do." Alara told him about growing up in foster homes, about the way the night sky had been the only thing that never left her. She told him how small she felt under all those stars, and how for the first time she didn't feel small next to him. On the 9th night they kissed. It happened without planning, in the narrow space between telescope mounts, moonlight slicing silver bars across their faces. His mouth tasted like ozone after lightning. When he pulled away, his pupils were huge. "This is forbidden twice," he whispered. "To touch a native. To love one." "I'm not a native," she said. "I'm Alara." He laughed then, a sound like glass wind chimes in a storm. They became reckless. She drove him to the Valley of Fire at 3 a.m. so he could walk barefoot across red sandstone that still held the day's heat. He showed her how to see infrared, and suddenly the desert at night bloomed with the heat traces of kangaroo rats and sidewinder trails. She taught him to drive her Jeep. He stalled it 17 times and laughed harder than she had ever heard anyone laugh. They made love in the dry wash behind the observatory, blankets spread over sand still warm from the day. His skin flickered with faint bioluminescence when he came, constellations racing across his chest like silent fireworks. Afterward she traced them with her tongue and asked what they meant. "Old war maps," he said. "Older than your species. I should have them removed. I never wanted to." The first hunter arrived on the 14th night. Alara woke to the smell of burnt cinnamon. Kale was already standing at the window, every muscle rigid. In the parking lot, 3 figures in matte black armor that drank the light stood perfectly still. Their helmets had no visors, only smooth obsidian curves reflecting the stars wrong, as if the reflections came from another sky. Kale spoke one word in his own language. It felt like a tooth breaking inside Alara's mind. "Run." They fled in the Jeep with the lights off, bouncing across the desert on dirt tracks Alara knew from childhood. Behind them the observatory exploded without sound, just a bloom of white fire that turned night into noon for 3 heartbeats. Kale sat in the passenger seat bleeding silver from his nose. "They tagged me," he said. "A beacon in the marrow. I can't remove it without killing myself. They'll follow until the stars burn out. Then we keep moving," Alara said. They drove west. Utah, Colorado, days bleeding into nights. She stole license plates in grocery store parking lots. He sat wrapped in blankets in the back seat, growing thinner, the glow under his skin dimming. Without the veil's particular radiation he was starving slowly. In a motel outside Grand Junction she held him while he shook with withdrawal, whispering every constellation name she knew until he slept. That was when she understood she would die for him if she had to. The realization was calm, like stepping into cold water and discovering you could breathe it. They decided to head north toward the Canadian border, toward darkness and cold where fewer people lived to notice strange lights in the sky. They stole a rust-red pickup with an empty horse trailer and filled the trailer with blankets, canned food for her, and every extension cord Alara could buy so Kale could siphon power wherever they stopped. On the high plains of Montana, under a sky so white it hurt, they stopped at an abandoned radar station from the Cold War. The giant dish pointed at the stars like an ear listening for ghosts. Kale climbed inside the dish and lay on his back. After an hour his skin began to glow again, faint but steady. He smiled for the first time in weeks. "Old human machines," he said. "Beautiful. You built ears to hear your enemies and accidentally made a feeding bowl for exiles." They stayed 3 days. Snow started to fall, soft and relentless. Alara hunted jackrabbits with a .22 she finally learned to shoot. They made a fire in the control room and ate rabbit roasted on rebar. Kale told her stories of the Vale. Oceans of liquid diamond, cities grown from song, lovers who merged minds so completely they forgot whose memories were whose. "I want that," she said. "Even if it's only for a minute." He looked at her for a long time. "There is a way," he said quietly. "But you would never be able to go home. The Covenant would hunt you too. And humans fear what they don't understand. You would be an abomination to both kinds." "I crossed that bridge when I hid you in my shed," she said. He kissed her forehead, trembling. The second hunter attack came at dusk. They were asleep in the control room when the sky split open. This time the hunters did not walk. They fell like black meteors, cratering the snow 50 yards away. Kale shoved Alara behind the radar console and stood in the doorway. The lead hunter removed its helmet. The face underneath was almost human, but the bones were too fine, the eyes solid obsidian. It spoke in Kale's language. Alara caught only one word repeated, "Traitor." Kale answered. His voice carried a note she had never heard. Something ancient and terrible. The hunters stepped back as one. Then Kale did something that made Alara's heart stop. He knelt in the snow. Silver blood poured from his nose, his ears, the corners of his eyes. He was burning out his own beacon, ripping the Covenant's hook from his bones with sheer will. The air around him shimmered with heat. Snow flashed to steam in a perfect circle. The hunters raised weapons that looked like shards of night. Alara didn't think. She grabbed the .22, stepped into the doorway and started shooting. The first bullet ricocheted off armor with a bell-like ping. The second took the lead hunter in the throat where the helmet had been. Black fluid sprayed. It fell without a sound. The remaining two turned toward her. Kale rose, swaying. His skin blazed now, too bright to look at directly. He spoke a single phrase that felt like the birth of a star inside Alara's skull. The hunters screamed. Their armor cracked like burnt paper. They collapsed smoking. Kale fell forward into the snow. She dragged him inside. He was barely conscious, skin hot enough to blister her hands. The glow was fading fast. "They'll send more," he rasped. "Stronger ones. I'm almost gone." No, the word tore out of her like a sob. "You don't get to leave." "There's one chance," he said. "The ship that died when I crashed, it left a seed. A single cell. If I can reach it, merge with it, I can regrow. But the seed is keyed to veil radiation. I need to be in the fold to finish the merge. I can open a door, but only for a moment. And only one can pass." Alara understood what he was offering. "Take me with you," she said. He shook his head. "You'll die here or live there. No middle place. I choose there." He searched her face for hesitation and found none. They drove south through the night, back to Nevada, back to the original crater. Snow turned to rain somewhere over Utah. The desert welcomed them with the smell of creosote and wet stone. The crater had become a shallow bowl lined with glassy sand. In its center lay a single crystal no larger than a heart, pulsing faint blue. Kale knelt. The crystal rose into his hand like a bird returning to its master. He looked at Alara one last time. "Last chance to stay," he said. She took his face in both hands and kissed him hard enough to taste blood. Hers or his, she wasn't sure. "Open the door." The sky tore. It wasn't dramatic like in movies. There was no thunder, no pillar of light. Just a sudden absence like a held breath, and then a rip the size of a man, edges shimmering violet. Through it Alara glimpsed something that hurt to see. Spires of impossible geometry. Auroras that sang air that tasted like music. Kale stepped toward it. She followed, fingers laced with his. Behind them, 3 new hunters fell from the sky, faster, larger, weapons already raised. Kale turned. With the last of his strength he flung the crystal seed like a grenade. It struck the lead hunter and bloomed into white fire. The explosion folded space like cloth. The rip in the sky widened, then snapped shut, taking the fire, the hunters, the desert night with it. Alara felt the world vanish. There was only falling upward, through cold darker than black, and Kale's hand in hers. When sensation returned, she was lying on something that felt like warm glass. Above her, 3 suns burned gentle gold. The air tasted of thunderstorms and oranges. Kale knelt beside her, whole again, skin luminous and unscarred, eyes shining with tears that fell upward like sparks. Around them stretched a city grown rather than built. Towers like frozen music, bridges of living light. He touched her cheek. "You're home," he said. She laughed until she cried, and the tears floated away like tiny stars. Far away, on a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow sun, a shallow crater in the Nevada desert went cold and quiet. No one ever found the jeep, the pickup, or the girl who worked the night shift at the observatory. Sometimes astronomers notice an unexplained gap in their data logs from August through November, a stretch where every telescope on Earth briefly looked away from the same patch of sky, as if something asked them politely to mind their own business. They never figure out why. And somewhere in a fold of reality humans will never reach, a woman with desert dust still in her soul walks beside a man whose skin maps ancient wars, hand in hand under 3 gentle suns, learning how to pronounce each other's names in a language made of light. They have all the time in the universe, and they use every minute.